Welcome back to another beginner's guide. This one features the Hellevator, and as the name implies, it's an elevator straight to the Underworld. It's one of the most important pieces of infrastructure on any map, in my opinion, and in my first playthrough years ago, I neglected to do this for quite some time, and it resulted in me wasting a lot of time spelunking through caverns and that sort of thing to get deeper and deeper into the world. And there soon reaches a point where it's just way more effective to take the time to build one of these Hellevators. And so I've once again brought back my endgame character, just since he's stronger and doesn't have to worry about anything. He also has a very good pickaxe that clears dirt blocks and other obstacles very quickly. So it's just a bit of insurance on my part. But don't worry, if you have a relatively young character with relatively weak equipment, you can still at the very least get started on one of these Hellevators. Now, these come in different shapes and styles. Well, maybe not shapes, but they come in different styles and different widths. I typically would have a 3-block wide Hellevator. That is certainly a little slower than having just a 2-block wide Hellevator, but on the whole, I just think it's a little easier to use, and it looks a little nicer too, because with every block deeper you go, I strongly recommend having a rope going down. Why do I recommend that? Well, odds are you're going to slip and fall at some point, and by having a rope in your Hellevator, you're going to have a lot of insurance. And having it in the middle of just a 3-tile wide Hellevator basically makes it impossible to fall to your death if the Hellevator itself is enclosed in on either side with walls. More on that later, but as you can see here on the video, I've got my Stardust Dragon out just to get rid of any baddies that might spawn. Again, this is not required, and I certainly have made more than one Hellevator myself with a fairly young and inexperienced character with fairly modest equipment. So don't think that this is by any means a late game project. It can be, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be that fancy, although you saw me plant some obsidian and shape it a little at the entrance just for some effect. That's purely optional, it's just for aesthetics. Any old entrance will do, and in this case, pretty much right below the entrance, I don't bother lining the walls with obsidian or anything like that. Now you certainly could do that if you're more of the obsessive compulsive nature. I'm not. And more importantly, this is a large world on PC, so it's as big as they get, which means that the Hellevator is going to have to go for quite a distance, which means if I were to be fancy, it would require a lot more work than if it were simply a small world. So I'm not going to bother. I think the digging, the excavation, and the planting of the rope is going to be work enough for my character, even as a late game character. But rest assured, just to prove that I can do this, I am going to construct the entire Hellevator in one sitting. Granted, I'm not going to record the entire process, but you have my word, I was able to do this in one evening, in less than an evening in fact, in a single sitting. I did go back to base from time to time to purchase more rope from the merchant, and maybe to sell a few things that I acquired along the way. But that's really it. You'll find that if you're like me and you want to line the sides of your Hellevator with earth just to keep it hemmed in on either side for your protection, you'll have adequate materials from the excavation work itself. You'll get a lot of dirt, a lot of stone, and a lot of other materials as you delve deeper and deeper into the world. And so you don't really need to worry too much about acquiring anything other than gels and wood for the torches you'll want to illuminate your shaft here, and of course you'll need the rope, which admittedly I had to go back to base a couple of times to buy more rope, but in the grand scheme of things it wasn't too bad. And once you've built this, you're going to use this time and again, and it's not just to get to the bottom biome, the Underworld. You can use it to get to everything in between, as you might imagine, the surface and the Underworld. You might see frozen caverns, you might see a glowing mushroom biome. Whatever you see along the way, you can certainly put a door in your Hellevator so that you can come and go as you please to explore anything you come across. So it's a very useful thing to have, but even if you were to want it simply to get to the Underworld, there's no better way to get down to the bottom of the world than one of these things. I think any experienced Terrarian would recommend building one of these. Just like the skyway, if you've seen my skyway tutorial video, at the end game, if you put the effort in, this kind of a structure could be supplanted with a teleportation system, but for the vast majority of your game experience, the Hellevator is the way to go. And that's really why I'm making a video about it. One thing you might notice in this video is I'm having to get rid of some fluids. In this case, this is water, and my character has an accessory so he can't drown, but you may not have that when you get to the point where you're trying to clear flooded shafts like this one. And there are a number of ways to go about getting rid of water, or later on lava, from the Hellevator. One thing I would recommend is simply digging out to the east or the west from your Hellevator and digging a tunnel that's parallel to your Hellevator that will eventually feed into some kind of a chasm into which you can direct the water, or as I said later on, the lava. It's kind of actually an interesting game. It makes you feel a bit like a civil engineer or something, because it's a kind of a problem-solving task. Granted, I'm not trying to tell you it's the most fun thing in Terraria, but it is a little different from what you normally encounter in the game. And there's some enjoyment to be had, some satisfaction to be had in figuring ways to clear the water as an obstacle. And I guarantee you it may seem a little daunting at first, especially with lava, which you can't really mess around with because it will kill you very quickly. But there will be a way to drain the water or lava from your Hellevator. You just have to think it through, maybe do some side digging, and I guarantee that you'll have a way to clear it out. It just might take a little bit of time, and it might be a bit of a distraction from the main tunnel, but it can happen. And you know, frankly, if you get to the point where you're really deep in the world and you're encountering problems with lava, odds are you've already encountered similar problems with large pools of underground water, and so you'll have figured out a way to go about circumventing those obstacles and draining your tunnel of whatever, whether it's water or lava. So other than that, what other obstacles might be in your way? Well, not much really. This particular tunnel had the misfortune of going through a little spider mini biome with cobwebs, which is a bit of a pain because every time I use it now, it slows me down temporarily, but it's really just a speed bump. It's not too bad, and I don't think it's anything particularly fatal to the Hellevator. But really, other than drowning in water or burning to death in lava, the other thing you've got to be concerned about is if you dig down and you find that your Hellevator is opening up into some massive chasm. The problem with the Hellevator that's not walled off like I'm doing is if you're using it, you might get knocked off course by a random enemy in the course of your descent, which is obviously not good. If your fall is uncontrolled, you quickly fall to your death. That's been my experience anyway, and so ever since learning that harsh lesson the first time, I have been very vigilant about walling off the Hellevator, even if it means just a little bit more work up front. I've found it's definitely worth it. And in this particular Hellevator, you'll see that I'm kind of undoing some of my earlier exploration, but rest assured, on the whole, it's still way more convenient to do this at the expense of your exploration, because first, as I said earlier, you're going to uncover a lot of other caverns that will be easily accessed, so it's not like you can't continue exploring in the future just because you're kind of putting this roadblock in this natural cave. And secondly, just the convenience of having the direct access to the Underworld is kind of paramount, especially at the point in the game later on when you might want to transition to hard mode by fighting the Wall of Flesh. But that's really a video for a different time. Suffice it to say, it's worth all the sacrifices, both in terms of your time and any minor inconvenience to any routes you've already opened up, just by putting this Hellevator in. Think of it as the old interstate system in 1950s America, how it went over farms and cities and all, you know, with overpasses and all that. They did that for a reason, because it was more important and it was a pretty critical piece of infrastructure. So that's how I view the Hellevator here. It's a neat little thing. It's not something I did the first go around. It took me some time to invest my time to do it, and I don't regret doing it. And every new game ever since, I've built one. So I'm going to speed the video up here. As I said, I didn't record the entire construction because that would have made a really unnecessarily long video. This is a large world on the PC, as I said, so the worlds don't get larger than this. And there's not really much that you would see in the second half of the video that you wouldn't see in the first half. The only major difference is the deeper you get and the closer you get to the furthest down biome, the Underworld, the more pools of lava will appear in place of bodies of water. That's really the only difference. And of course, the fluid dynamics for lava are essentially the same as with water. And so the tricks you've learned in the early course of your Hellevator construction are going to serve you well later on. And of course, with the obvious rule that you will need to be a little more careful around the lava than you were with the water earlier on. Well, that's pretty much it. The enemies do get tougher the further down you get, and there's no shame in perhaps discontinuing your descent until you power up your character a little more. But odds are, if you're at the point in the game where you need to get to the Underworld to progress, you'll have a pickaxe and armor and weapons sufficient to keep digging down. And even if it means going back to base somewhat regularly to refresh and recharge, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have to be built in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day. And really the only reason this character is able to build it in one sitting is because it's an endgame character with a lot of gear that makes it pretty darn easy, just a little tedious. So what you've seen so far is pretty much it. There's no real trick to it. You just keep going down. You find ways to drain your tunnel of lava and water, and you wall it in so that enemies from the outside can't bother you as you descend on the rope once it's completed. And that's pretty much it. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. Your main enemy is tedium, especially if you have a larger world, but just like the skyway bridge I talked about in my other video, once you've done it, you've done it. You can always pretty it up in the future if you want. I've never done so just because it would involve so much work. And so once it's built, you can use it forever. It's great. And I've never actually bothered to build a teleportation system down to the Underworld. I've always found that even on large worlds, the Hellevator serves its function admirably. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't want to just keep talking for the sake of talking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually skip ahead now to the finished product. And you'll see, from top to bottom, this thing is pretty wonderful. I did a little bit of extra work here at the top with a wooden platform, or more like an Underworld platform. And I added a little bit of extra obsidian just to make the entrance look a little nicer. Now, the falling speed is the same as the descent speed if you're connected to the rope. So it really doesn't matter whether you fall or use the rope. I prefer to use the rope. I just feel like I have a little more control as I go down. But one thing you'll notice, I'm slowed down very briefly by some cobwebs. But other than that, I'm really well protected because I took the time to wall everything in so that no enemies can come into my tunnel and bother me. Now later on there might be some enemies capable of going through walls, but odds are you'll be clear of them by the time they catch up to you, so it's really not a problem. And as you go deeper, as I promised, you see more and more pools of lava. I really did have to divert a surprising amount of lava to get down to this Underworld, but it wasn't too bad, and it was, as I said, kind of a fun game to figure out how to do it. And so that's your quick path to the Underworld. This isn't really a tutorial on the Underworld, but rest assured, this is the final stage of normal mode before you transition to hard mode. And you'll find yourself down in this zone really before you know it. And really, if you want to do what needs to be done down here, you're going to want a Hellevator for ease of access. Because as I said at the beginning, going through a cavern system is really laborious. It takes forever, and there's really no comparison in the speed at which you can use this Hellevator. And just to demonstrate, you can easily return upwards as long as you have the rope all the way down to the bottom. So it's not just a one-way trip. I would imagine that this is seldom done. Odds are you have some kind of item equipped or even a potion to return to base, or you could save and exit so that you respawn at base. But just to demonstrate, you can move back up the rope pretty easily. And so if you're going from one point to another, if you have multiple points of interest along your route, you can certainly go back through your elevator the other way. So there you go. That's pretty much the Hellevator explained. Call it what you will. I think the Hellevator is as clear a name as anything. Gets you straight down to the pits of hell, and you can do what needs to be done down there. Again, that's really a discussion for another video. Is it worth the work to do this? I would say yes. It's just like the skyway or the sky bridges. It's something that you'll put the work in up front, but it's definitely worth it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.